there's very little conversation that I know about in the field of grief where people will acknowledge the physicality of the loss.
Right.
And part of, I think, what happens in bodywork and what you do with somebody who's in grief is that you actually complete a circle of experience that's crucial. If your father dies, your mother dies, your parent dies, nobody ever kisses you on the cheek the way your parent did, no matter how old you are as an adult child, for example, when they die. And if your sister or brother dies, nobody sits next to you in a movie theater or watching TV or at the dinner table quite the same way that your sibling did. And so you can kind of conjugate that out in a million and one different ways.
Right.
And so certainly if your lover, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, partner dies, then part of what dies is the erotic, sensual, sexual experience of your body with their body. And that kind of body grief is a kind of topic that, at least in the United States, we're hesitant to talk about. We don't always have vocabulary attached to it. It feels awkward. It can feel embarrassing. It can be too vulnerable and exposing in a certain way. And so instead of grappling with that clumsiness, we end up shutting down around it.
Right. And you had two different veins there. You had the grief vein, which is, we're not really taught how to grieve at all, even though it's a universal human experience. And then you also have the sexual thing, the erotic thing, which is also dampened down and repressed as well in our culture. So you put them together. Do you know what I'm saying?
And I think the opposite is true as well for somebody. Let's say in just a stereotypical way, you're an adult woman and your father sexually abused you. And then he's died. And you're in grief because grief is a natural response to loss, to someone's death. And you may have a lot of feelings about whether you loved him or didn't love him. There may be a lot of issues around where you were at that point in time when he died. But then when you're touched in your grief, in body work, it has a different connotation. It can be a healing connotation, but nonetheless, I think that the delicacy of it with body work is equally as potent for a sense of healing. Because in your grief, you're touched, let's say, appropriately, in your grief, by a body worker, in a way that you weren't touched appropriately by the person who's died. So part of, I think, the function of body work is that it helps us to have a sense that even though we're alone, we're not particularly isolated. Because in the most literal way, somebody else is touching your body. So you may not be talking to the person, you may not be just silently present with them across the room, not touching them. You're literally touching their body. So people have the inherent sense that they're not alone.
Wow.
And
being touched in that isolation.
Yes.
Being able to touch the isolation. Even, and sometimes I think people get so isolated from their lives, let alone within themselves. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, really, but that it kind of, there's a numbing out that happens where they might not even know how isolated they are until they get touched. And they're like, oh, like it can touch a part of them that can evoke this remembering of actually being connected.
So I think one of the things that bodywork in the West can offer is really to help us to advance that the body needs to be a part of the entirety of the human experience, and in some ways not just something that medical science looks at, just as it can't function only if theology looks at the body, and we can't function entirely if just psychology looks at the body. So all these things fundamentally, I think, have to be integrated, and I think bodywork in the West is maybe poised to advance us in that thinking and in that functioning.
Because it kind of bridge that gap. in a way.
Yes.
Or be a liaison, if you will.
Wouldn't it be amazing?
You know
Yes, wouldn't it be amazing if in the West we came to understand that just as you have your morning coffee or tea or maybe not, but breakfast, eat a good breakfast in the morning, is that you also need to sort of give yourself a good point massage on the palm of your hand as a fundamental part of like the way you start your day.
Yes.
And etc. You can kind of conjugate that out.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe the role of body work is that it's beyond just the more narrow ways that we've thought about it in the past.